Since the days of William the Conqueror, the New Forest has been a hunter's forest, a commoner's forest, a working forest. But now, England's newest national park has to find a balance between all of these and recognise its importance as a site for nature conservation. Now, in the past, many parts of this area underwent systemic drainage, and this altered the delicate balance of the streamside lawns, the bogs and the riverine woodland. But that delicate balance is now being restored through a series of initiatives known as the New Forest Life Project.
Life 3 follows on from Life 2, which was set about restoring the mire systems. It also recognised that it didn't do everything, and Life 3 was to restore the links of the riverine woodland between the mires at the top of the water catchments, through the river systems, through the forest, out to the sea.
It's a European funded grant, and the one that applies to the New Forest is called Life Nature.
The project was one of the largest of its type ever undertaken in the UK and had 6 partners: English Nature, the Environment Agency, the Forestry Commission, Hampshire County Council, the National Trust and the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds.
Well, I think the importance of the New Forest as a European designated site is reflected by the fact that we received a second tranche of Life Nature funding.
Life 3 has enabled us to carry out a huge amount of work, and without the funding we wouldn't have been able to touch anywhere near out of our own operating budget, which is why Life partnerships are so important to all organisations.
A lot of survey work has been carried out over the last 10 years by the Environment Agency. The results of those surveys were looked at quite carefully, and the areas most in need of restoration were in three out of the 6 catchments within the forest: the Lymington River, the Avon Water and the Hampshire Avon.
The Forestry Commission with the other partners set up a water basin forum, which was, we identified local groups which had an interest, and they've been meeting really from the outset of the project to now. They've been able to make changes and to assist with our decision making.
The New Forest is a very important site for its conservation interests. It's designated at a national and international level, so it's a heavily protected site. There's an awful lot of rare habitats and species which occur in the New Forest which don't occur in other parts of Europe. And because it's such a special site, we need to make sure that we maintain and, where possible, enhance its nature conservation interests.
These wetlands are crucial to the survival of many species, in particular lapwing, snipe, curlew and redshank. Now, in 1994, a survey measured the forest population of these wading birds. When the survey was repeated in 2004, there was a fear that numbers would have severely declined. But they were pleasantly surprised. Although there had been a slight decline, the forest had fared much better than other areas across southern England.
One of the likely reasons for the decreases not having occurred so much is the wonderful work that went on here with Life 2, restoring some of the mire habitats. And of course what we hope is that will further enhance the habitat for these species and allow the New Forest to cling onto them when everywhere else is doing so badly.
The New Forest's unique wetlands support some exceptionally rare plants and animals, both above and below the waterline. Over the years, the forest rivers caused severe flooding in times of torrential rain. So will this restoration initiative cause more or less flooding?
Naturally, when you talk about making an area wetter, there's those concerns. I think also from the commoners that they were concerned about their animals and whether more animals would become stuck in bogs and in wet areas.
As soon as anybody talks like that, the commoners are worried to death that they're going to try and flood everything. But of course, we're not going to allow that to happen.
So, these on-site meetings ensured that the forum members had their say, formulating the way ahead.
The New Forest supports the largest array of lowland valley mires found anywhere in Britain, and actually for that fact certainly most of Europe. The reason they're important is that they're relics of what was once, no doubt, a much larger sequence of open lowland habitats ranging from woodland, heathland, grasslands and the wetter areas on the adjacent to river floodplains, what have you. So it was once part of a much larger sort of semi-natural landscape.
Reinstatement involved cutting heather bales from the forest's own heath. These were used to dam the upper reaches of the mire streams, and over time the mires will naturally repair themselves. But to understand the problems downstream of these mires, you need to know something about the New Forest geology.
In an area like the New Forest, there's no solid geology for a substantial depth, and so we've got a lot of material which is unconsolidated, which actually can readily be eroded.
These geological characteristics, along with the forest's gentle gradient, naturally encourage quiet meanders and low banks. So by straightening these streams and rivers in the past, we have upset a natural balance. So when did this damage occur?
The biggest change came about probably in the 19th century, following the Deer Removal Act, which actually wasn't really just about deer. It was about the Crown growing more timber. They put in a massive system of drainage, hundreds of new drains, and they straightened many of the rivers so that they could grow their trees better.
It didn't stop there. This drainage work continued between the wars, but the real damage was done as recently as the 1960s.
The Forestry Commission bought a new machine, the Priestman. That machine is responsible for having drained much deeper than man would have done. And in fact, it worked so efficiently that the drains themselves started to erode and get bigger.
During the summer they run at a very low flow, but in the winters there's a very, very high volume of water comes down them. Because the volume of water comes down very quickly, it's a cutting action and cuts down. So it starts off with what will be a small shallow bank, will cut its way down, and it's a self-perpetuating action.
It's a very precious environment, and we want to make sure that we leave as minimal an impact as possible. Having said that, you can't go about an operation of this kind of scale without causing impacts. So before we even went on site, we looked at a whole range of impacts that we felt our works might have. So we'd actually tape off areas which were sensitive and we didn't want the machinery to go into.
And this thing has got to have been in use for probably, it could be hundreds of years. But this is really a very important...
We've looked at archaeological constraints, and again sites of value would be taped off so that we weren't able to access.
I suppose you call the precautionary principle ought to govern what you do.
Fishery officers of the Environment Agency use electrofishing to briefly stun fish, enabling their capture and safe removal from areas of work. They're released downstream, out of harm's way. With all the preparation complete, the work can now commence to reinstate the old meanders, raise bed levels and finally fill in the obsolete canalised sections.
Whether it's the river restoration, the mire restoration, bog woodland restoration, the majority of that work is undertaken during the summer months when water levels are at their lowest.
During the course of the works, vast amounts of material were moved around in a fragile environment.
But on this year's phase of works we've used approximately 9,000 tonnes of clay and about 5 to 5,500 to 6,000 tonnes of hogging. On one section we removed spoil which was dug out of the river of about 4,000 tonnes and reused that to infill some river sections on the Blackensford phase of the works. There's quite a lot of material being moved around the sites, and obviously some quite big machines to move that about. So again, we don't want to stop people's use of the forest, so we've done it in conjunction with the Forestry Commission. We've minimised the impact on the forest's tourist population by closing tracks, selected tracks and areas just to get our works done. And once we've moved past that section, we've opened them back up again.
With the works completed on this section near Rhinefield, even in times of spate, the river will be guided through these reclaimed meanders. But perhaps the most important job is to leave the forest as you found it. These restored meanders will encourage recolonisation by freshwater fish, such as the brook lamprey. Lampreys are attracted to the fast currents over these gravel beds. Holding on with their mouth sucker, they move stones in preparation for spawning. The high oxygen content of shallow, turbulent water aids the development of these small fry. Eventually, they'll join their parents, the sea trout, one of the largest fish that annually visit these forest streams. Further downstream, minnows feast on nutrients washed down from the headwaters. The return of these species is a good bioindicator of a stable river system, from source to sea. In the New Forest, the wet grasslands are known as streamside lawns by the commoners.
The very best grass in the forest for the commoning animals is the streamside lawns, because they grow all the year round. The valley mires are valuable for 2 or 3 months of the year, then they go stale and the animals move off. But you'll see the animals feeding on the streamside lawns all the year round. So that's their importance to us.
These lawns rely on seasonal flooding for their supply of nutrients. In times of heavy rain, fine silts suspended in the water wash over the lawns. However, with the stream choked by gravel, this lawn remained waterlogged for much of the year. With this restoration complete, the river follows a more defined channel, only spilling out over the lawn during periods of flood. The value of the lawn to the grazing animals has improved, and the river now follows a far more natural course. Now, part and parcel of floodplain restoration was the removal of commercial timber plantations, by the use of both chainsaw and timber harvester. This work by the Forestry Commission and the National Trust will hopefully allow riverine woodland to re-establish itself.
The timber was obviously a crop. It's come down at the right time, it's done its job, and now we can recreate what was here formerly. We're hoping that the areas that we've recreated of the riverine restoration work, we're hoping about 10% of that will come back to bog woodland.
The New Forest has some of the best examples of riverine and bog woodland left in Britain, supporting native trees such as alder, willow, oak and ash. Sycamore, along with more exotic and invasive species such as rhododendron and western hemlock, also had to be removed.
These are sensitive habitats, they've got sensitive soils, so we've had to look at new ways and some old ways to try and get the trees out. We've used heavy horse extraction down at Woodland, which was one of the first in the forest for a number of years.
The New Forest Life project is now complete. 184 hectares of valley bogs and mires have been restored, 141 hectares of wet grassland has been saved for grazing, and 10 kilometres of streams have been returned to their natural meanders. What of the future? Life after life. Well, these restorations are not just a short-term fix. They are a long-term conservation project that will protect and sustain the forest wetlands well into the future. Well, that's the New Forest Life project, but what does it mean to the visitors? Well, if you look carefully, you can see that time has been turned back here, and that at some stage in the future, this place is going to be a lot more enjoyable for people like me, naturalists, because it's going to be a lot more productive for the wildlife that likes things a bit wet.